Hello one, hello all, it's the gothiest ghost of them all, Casper in the flesh, and it's time for a review of Kendrick Lamar, GNX. Well, it's about time. It's almost the end of the year, you know. He's right. It means no time for back and forths. Time to get to the review. But anyway, Kendrick has been killing it artistically for over a decade now. Like, sales aside, with a lot of great records, a lot of great quality records that I absolutely love, from Section 80, Good Kid, Mad City, Untitled, Unmastered, Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers, and my absolute favorite album of the 2010s, I'm talking about T-Pab. With that LP alone being so absolutely thematically laser focused, unraveling itself with each Easter egg after Easter egg to the conclusion, such as starting with a poem that is started at the beginning of a track, having that correlate with that track, and as the album progresses, finding out that the poem is actually a poem to Tupac, which definitely has baked into it important social issues, self issues with societal ills, depression, self-loathing, racism, capitalism, temptations in the industry, which is played into this record, which we'll get into, which are addressed very creatively, including great inclusions of jazz, funk, neo-soul, and of course there was Good Kid, Mad City, an absolute cinematic, robust experience, probably one of the greatest story albums of all time. Also, Untitled, Unmastered, which honestly, even though it was rough copies of Kendrick's work, probably better than most artists who were actually signed and have a finished project. I just had to say it. And there's also Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers, which was a two-part album that also had this thematic, theatrical, play-like experience, where thematically it led to a very confessional moment from Kendrick, a very eye-widening moment from Kendrick, which is a confessionally tragic album, which leads to a very traumatic conclusion of sexual abuse due to the generational curse, addressing generational trauma. And now I'm seeing a little bit more rappers open up about sexual abuse, which is one thing about Kendrick. He is a trailblazer. A lot of what you get from Kendrick are how influential he's been. I've been seeing little bits of that after Kendrick's LP. And he has also spoken on trans rights, being trans affirming. And I get it, there could have been more to address it, there could have been a little bit more he could have done, but I feel due to the transphobia, the homophobia that has been baked into the hip-hop culture, or just society in general, I feel like this was a very important move to make, a very important statement to make. So although I did love that album, listening to this one through and through and through, I honestly could say this may be Kendrick's third best album, because it's loaded with bangers, but not just bangers, but he is saying something with these bangers. He's always saying something here. So he's going by the Bay Area playbook, the Westcoast playbook, the duets playbook, and nothing feels out of place here, and a lot of the refrains here, a lot of the bars here live rent-free in my head. Like, he's approached these tracks with so much care, so much devotion, and he's even paid attention to detail on how they contrast each other. And while this LP is not a concept record, it definitely does have the elements of one. It definitely does kind of feel like one, due to the strong focuses, the connections in some points to other tracks here, which drives back to the Kendrick, the Drake, and Cole beef. And there are tracks here that do kind of hint towards or focus on subtly the J. Cole, Drake, and Kendrick beef. And you see my reviews, you've heard my take on it from the beginning, but let me just brush up a bit how Cole dropped out after that weak-ass diss track he not only apologized for, but dropped off of streaming completely. However, Drake felt the need to respond, which he did twice. I think dropping Give Me 50 was a decent shot. He had some liners there that kind of stuck, but then followed that up with this absolutely garbage-ass AI diss track, using an AI voice of Tupac and Snoop Dogg, pretty much using their voices as puppets to egg on Kendrick. But then Kendrick came back with this absolutely multifaceted diss track, Euphoria, that had some scathing bars attached. And then after that, all hell broke loose. Which, in these series of diss tracks, came allegation after allegation, which were already pretty much alive, but Kendrick was breathing more life into, but in a very, very clever way. But the absolute nail in the coffin here had to be Meet the Grahams, where he's writing letters, yes, writing letters to each of Drake's family members in a very scathing, disrespectful, but deserved way, including that Drake was hiding another kid, a daughter. And then Kendrick dropping another scathing diss track, calling Drake a PDF, littered throughout, and having it so catchy, so memorable, not only played on radio, but also played at stadiums. And then this man goes to LA, brings a whole bunch of people on stage, and just performs this track with them, and performs this track multiple times, calling out Drake's questionable behavior, which is pretty valid. And then Drake responding with The Heart Part 6, which Kendrick does a version of, a obviously better version of here. And it's just a projective self-own from Drake here, with some very self-owning, projecting bars, and very gross bars too, making light of Kendrick's abuse, and saying that because he was abused, he feels that he has to call Drake out because of that. It's just a mess of a track, and honestly, a track Drake will have to live with, honestly. But I feel Kendrick takes that track and turns it into another beautiful chapter in the Heart catalog, which we will get into. Pretty much bringing life back to TDE with these stories on the life with TDE, the death of TDE, Black Hyphy. There's a lot to unpack with that one. So yes, with all that being said, I say all that to say this: Kendrick has really proven to stand out immensely from other rappers. So to put him in the big three and line him up with Drake, I would see as an insult, a huge insult, and I could see why Kendrick wanted to distance himself from that, and he continues to prove why he's not in that big three, why he's in another three of his own, or another lane of his own on this record. But enough about that. Let me focus on the tracks here and bring context to everything. It's a wild ride, so buckle up. And to go back to the Kendrick naysayers, maybe I should touch on that too, how they say, oh, Kendrick's voice, man, it's so annoying. It sounds like helium. Blech. He's such a complainer. He's so contradictory. He can't make bangers. He can't make bangers. He puts people to sleep. And if you ask me, I think that's complete bullshit. Because if you're really listening to what Kendrick is saying, you could see that if you're making statements like that, you're not listening hard enough, or at all. And when I say that, listen to what he's saying, piece together the lyrics that he's saying, correlate what you've heard on Kendrick's previous tracks to this, his experiences, or even the production, certain details in the production. Because Kendrick's always bringing something different. He's always bringing something powerful, as he did on Section 80. From Section 80, Good Kid, Mad City, Mr. Morale, T-Pab. He's always bringing something, giving you accessible, memorable hooks, but also addressing social issues too, as I mentioned before. As far as the production goes, we're getting production that is very West Coast centric. There are some that are outside of the West Coast, which honestly I was surprised at, but let's get into the West Coast. With production from DJ Mustard, where, as you're listening to the track TV Off, you can hear Kendrick yelling, screaming his brains out, saying like he's powering up like a fucking Super Saiyan. Mustard! All over the track TV Off, like it's an absolute battle cry, or longtime producer Soundwave. And one of the greatest saxophonists of our time, Kamasi Washington, who I will say also made a fantastic sonic contribution to TPAB. And there are other artists on here which, again, are outsiders of Westcoast, like Missouri R&B singer-songwriter SZA, Jersey Boy producer, singer-songwriter, yes, talking about Jack Antonoff. And given his sonic landscape to Taylor Swift as of late, that leaves a lot to be desired. I kind of was a little nervous going into this, but Jack really did prove himself here. Jack really did add another gem to his catalog. And that's one thing too. I keep forgetting that Kendrick is a mainstream artist because he's so standout. He's so outside the box. I keep forgetting he's a mainstream artist. And with these production choices, he's definitely taking on a lot of areas here. Like genres I haven't heard in quite a bit that are, I would say, throwback to the 2000s. And I would say conceptually, in terms of performance, he is breathing new life into these genres like Hyphy, with fat, bouncy bass, psychedelic sprinkling synths, enchantingly gorgeous R&B tracks with SZA, most notably on Luther, which has a lot of fantastic chemistry, beautiful call and response vocals, or even nervous music on Peakaboo. And even Ratchet music, which, yes, he is using Ratchet music, but he's saying something with it. He's bringing meaning with it. He's really bringing the hardcore elements to the forefront, but he's also addressing issues with them. And also calling out people on their bullshit, like podcast comedian turned right-wing podcaster hack Andrew Schultz with his dumb, disgusting, racist comments on black women. And also having fascists like Trump on with barely any pushback. And it really tells a lot. And while Kendrick doesn't mention Andrew Schultz by name, you definitely do get the impression he is talking about him. And I think he references it well with this line. I think it's pretty obvious, referencing to the opener, "Don't let no white comedian talk about no black woman, that's law." Now, if you're expecting Kendrick to put Not Like Us on this album, you may be disappointed. However, I do think he brings a more powerful track here. While not the Drake diss track, he is broadcasted everywhere. I would dare say turn this TV off. I would dare say TV off is more anthemic, more adventurous, more powerful. And honestly, I think the album is better for it. Not to downplay Not Like Us or anything. I think that's a great track. But I feel like he brought something new and more memorable with this track here, with shouting mustard and the refrain, having it be catchy, having it be powerful, playing into the album. Not to mention the regal triumphant horns that are on this track. And all that when we get this beat switch. And I think it's a great start too, that starts off with this punchy, booming bass with a tight time signature with the synth strings. And the beat switch, in my opinion, addresses and connects fantastically to Kendrick's theme here, his narrative here, as he speaks on contradictions of those who say they want to make change, but aren't practicing what they preach. And you realize after the beat switch, the first part of the verse was addressing the stagnation, the lack of progress of getting black people together to make a change. There's not too many revolutionaries. And the second half is simplifying rebellion. It's simplifying the revolution. It's simplifying the command of black unity, saying we need more unification. United we stand, divided we fall. And a genius reference to the late great Gil Scott-Heron. The revolution will not be televised. And also I think this plays into the opinion that Kendrick has had for years, the message he has been trying to put out for years. And all this coming together to fight white supremacy, capitalism. And for years, Kendrick has been about bringing in black listeners. I mean, me as a white guy, this music, even though I love this music, he's not speaking to me. He's not speaking to a white audience. But I do feel love for this music. I do love this music and I do want to talk about it. I do want to put people onto it. Because while I can't relate to what's going on here, I am definitely feeling what's happening. Kendrick is so moving due to me knowing what's going on. As long as we're living in this capitalistic society of neoliberalism and leading to fascism, yeah, these messages should not fall on deaf ears. And while Kendrick has been asking for it, he is now demanding it. He's commanding it. And again, in the times we're living in the fascism we're heading into, this message is more than necessary. And on this LP, Kendrick delivers quite a few powerful curveballs here, like the absolutely passionate and beautiful Gloria, where lyrically Kendrick is creating this picture of this love interest he has in mind, only to find out that this woman he's devoting his love to, his dedication to, is none other than his pen, Gloria. And the gift and curse that she's brought, how they've become so inseparable, and how she's brought him so much success. And there's even an acted out snippet of a woman emphatically saying how she gave him power, she made him what he is. And for those who didn't put two and two together, again, he's talking about his pen and personifying this pen as his woman, who you would think is Whitney, but it's not Whitney. But it's just so heartfelt and meaningful, and I feel like with tracks like this is what that creates. This is what creates this dichotomy for Kendrick amongst other artists. And Kendrick on this LP sounds so hungry. He sounds devoted. He sounds pissed off. And even more confrontational than ever. With the opener whacked out Murals as he's taking jabs at racist comedians like Andrew Schultz, but also legendary rappers too that have influenced Kendrick, such as Lil Wayne, Snoop Dogg. And I would say the jab here definitely does run along the lines of J. Cole, I Let Nas Down, but this time I would say this is not as friendly here, not as much as a somber note here. Like, I would say this is more of a disappointment of the astonishment of how someone who you've looked up to, who you gave your flowers to, is just so not with the idea of you performing at the Super Bowl instead of them. And I get it. New Orleans is Lil Wayne's town. I understand that. But with Kendrick's relevancy, honestly, I can't really get mad at him being chosen for this. I'm not taking away Lil Wayne's legendary status. I'm not. But with Kendrick being the most relevant, I honestly can't really get mad at that. And with the lack of support in the reaction of Lil Wayne, I could see Kendrick's frustration here. On the opener of Whacked Out Murals, as he says, used to bump Carter 3, held my rolly chain proud. Irony, I think my hard work let Lil Wayne down. Whatever though, call me crazy. Everybody questionable. Turn me to an Eskimo. I drew the line in decimals. Also speaking on betrayals of Snoop Dogg, someone who has been super influential to him, someone who was on his best album, and the betrayal was definitely felt when Snoop Dogg reposted the diss track where his voice was AI'd towards Kendrick, endorsing that diss track, which was the distasteful TaylorMade. So, rightfully so, Kendrick should feel weird about it. And I'm glad he addressed it with this hilarious follow-up line, where he says he's hoping like Snoop Dogg was high because if he was in the right mind and had the right judgment, he wouldn't have posted that bullshit. And going back to Let Nas Down, the only person here who was giving Kendrick his flowers was Nas, who also is sampled on this record, who's congratulated Kendrick, shown support for Kendrick. So yeah, this right here is just retaliation to anyone who has stepped on Kendrick's toes. And this isn't some petty Drake shit. Kendrick is actually addressing those who should be called upon, where it's rightfully deserved, calling out those who have stabbed him in the back, and now knows to distance himself from them. And if you listen closely to the lyrical jabs here, he also references the dumb-ass decision that these rich dudes, artists, public figures have invested in doing these crypto scams, this NFT bullshit, you know, succumbing to seedy businesses like Bitcoin, and Wayne being involved in them as well as Snoop. So Kendrick is very much so telling it like he sees it. Honestly, I feel like this does call back in a way to Tupac's, aka Machiavelli's 7-Day Theory, because now it's no holds barred, gloves completely off, and Kendrick's really finding himself with his back against the wall, which is unfortunate because even though Kendrick clearly won this Drake beef, I feel like he's gained more enemies from this beef. It's like he's made new foes and lost old friends, unfortunately. And GNX, I feel, offers inklings to a conclusion, a message, kind of like T-Pab. Even though this isn't necessarily a story album, it's not exactly a concept album, but it's a plethora of bangers that I think is sequenced beautifully. Given how much of an intense tension builder Whacked Out Murals is, loaded with shots of all those who want smoke. And there's a line here that's censored where I think he's either talking about Drake or Diddy. But after that, we get the absolutely crazy, intense West Coast banger Squabble Up, which has some hilarious lines and vocal variations from Kendrick. Look good, but she ain't got no taste. Which I feel vocally is very unorthodox. And I can see that line in cadence rubbing people the wrong way. But I feel Kendrick does have a knack for his idiosyncratic performances and humor as well, and really knows how to make a banger with it. Accompanied with this beautiful vintage ear candy vocal sample from freestyle artist Debbie Deb. And the song here just brings a fantastic blend of G-Funk, freestyle, hyphy, not to mention how a majority of the refrains here are so damn catchy. Squabble up, squabble up. And also, even though this is not a concept album, I do think there are moments here that correlate to the song Reincarnated. And if you listen to what's being said here, the major influences of Tupac Shakur, and granted, completely different scenario back when he was beefing with a majority of people in the industry, but I feel he's kind of likening himself to that position here, as he's making a reference to when Tupac spit at the camera with a line like, spit a loogie at the camera, speed off, yeah, it's us. And as you listen to it, he's very much so speaking from the perspective of someone who has a conflict with someone, who is ready for battle at all time, guard up. But then keep in mind, because later then we get Reincarnated, but in between these tracks, there are other tracks here that if you're looking at a surface level, you may miss, like the track Luther, in reference to the late Luther Vandross. And it's definitely easy to get lost in, it's very beautiful, it's very entrancing, with its lavish strings, lovely layered vocals, that are sung very beautiful, very syncopated between SZA and Kendrick. So I not only want to admire the decadence here, but also the message and the correlation. Because I feel like we're getting either the perspective here from either Lucy, or we're getting this perspective from Gloria, and it's not as clear. Are we getting the message from the pen? Are we getting the message from the evils? As we hear these bars of dreams, making them multiply, defeating enemies. Again, the absolute rejection of peace from Kendrick's enemies. And the absolutely chilling Tupac reference here of a rose growing from concrete. And that rose being Tupac. And it's no fucking question that the song Man in the Garden is very much so a reference, and I'm spitballing here. I am just guessing, because with Tupac meeting his fate at this time, again, not comparing the two, but seeing the fate that lied for him and comparing that fate to Jesus, there's definitely a biblical correlation here. And instrumentally, it's a great build-up, and solemnly builds to something very aggressive, and kind of reminiscent of Nas's One Mic, and also Phil Collins' Field in the Air Tonight. And I don't know, maybe I'm just putting together all these references and correlations and similes and making them mean something, but to me, it's kind of hard not to ignore. It's kind of hard not to ignore that there is definitely some sort of messaging going on here. some sort of narrative build and connection and tie-in, as Kendrick is reaffirming to himself that he needs peace. He deserves the peace. He deserves the affirmation of knowing that he's one of the greatest. He deserves the success. He deserves the wealth, having these pure intentions, resisting temptations. And I'm not exactly sure who Kendrick is really talking to specifically here. Like, who is he talking to here? Like, I feel he's speaking to a person, or perhaps speaking to his pen, maybe? How he's giving himself all the power and he deserves all the credit and he deserves it all. I feel like this is one of those albums where I'm trying to decode everything. And I think I got most of it. And I feel like the title here, GNX, the title of the album, GNX, Kendrick's favorite car, his Buick, which is featured on the cover. The album really does play into a selection of tracks of some sort, like something you're cruising to, but they culminate together in some way. And upon listening to Kendrick for so long, you can't help but ignore the generational trauma that's put here. You can't ignore how Kendrick is calling out evils within the industry, within the business. And through this generational trauma, through his hard work, his sacrifice, his catalog, I think Kendrick really does deserve his accolades. He does deserve his flowers. And I feel the GOAT label is definitely deserving. And the track Hey Now has this booming bass and almost these hyper jagged Friday the 13th type breaths that are in the background. And the track is definitely a Hyphy track, definitely has a lot of minimalism here. As Kendrick's flow, aggression really creates this contrast here. But it's clear where Kendrick is coming from. Kendrick is talking about keeping the peace from within, keeping in touch with those incarcerated, and having friends desperate for fame. So I'm not sure if Kendrick is speaking from his own perspective here, or speaking from the perspective of the absolute mind-blowing conclusion we get on Reincarnated. Because Kendrick here is just coming off so prideful, so pompous. Because as we get into the next track, if we get into the depth of the next track, it definitely does make sense. It definitely does click. And I also love the back and forth chemistry between Kendrick and Dottie Six. And with Kendrick's body of work, with what he's been speaking on, with what he's been through, there is a massive amount of validity to the title of this track here, Reincarnated, especially with how creative and dynamic he is on this record. And honestly, this makes for the most powerful track here, next to Gloria. But not only one of the most powerful tracks on this record, the most powerful track on this record, but probably one of the most powerful tracks Kendrick has ever put out, period. About Kendrick speaking on these iconic musicians, these artists, such as on the first verse, John Lee Hooker and Billie Holiday, and it really becomes apparent to why he chose these artists in general. And I was like thinking to myself why he was, like, I was really questioning that. And the reason why is because what you're hearing is this mirrored reference to these artists, and the main person Kendrick is speaking on, who you find out as he goes from, again, John Lee Hooker to Billie Holiday, as John Lee Hooker was kicked out of his house at an early age, and Billie Holiday succumbing to heroin addiction. And the last verse, as we see Kendrick is talking to somebody, and who he's talking to is God. So switching that around to Father, to Heavenly Father, kicked out of his home, kicked out of heaven, as Kendrick goes deeper here, as he's not speaking from the perspective of himself, but he is retelling the story of Satan, the devil, which isn't too far off from, if you've listened to T-Pab, Lucy, Lucifer, the evils, that's where Kendrick is mirroring. So this makes perfect sense. So what he did here was he did a retelling of the devil's story, correlating it to Kendrick's, saying how he was the devil incarnate, but finding the ills, finding the criticisms to point out, and taking those temptations that he feels the devil has brought into music. But honestly, it's not, I could say people would look at this and say, oh, we're talking about the devil, and we all know it's this, all know it's that. Valid. But I feel he's using the devil as an allegory to the evil in music, the temptation, the corruption, and he's saying, let's speak on this, let's take this out and improve the industry, improve the music, and bring it back to what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be powerful, so let's take the capitalism out. Let's take the seedy environments out and keep it to what it's supposed to be. So it's a massively mind-blowing moment. And the fact that this is to a Tupac beat of Made Guys, we'll call it Made Guys, and tying into Tupac, which Tupac succumbed to the evils of the industry and the temptations. So this is definitely a great mirroring of Tupac here, especially with all the components playing out in Tupac's life and his career. So yes, definitely a genius moment, a mind-blowing moment, and a very surreal, chilling moment that gives me chills every time I listen to it. So even if you're a Kendrick hater, you do have to admit, or you should admit, this is genius storytelling. And in the context of the record, right after we get TV Off, which hits much harder once you match the context of that track, of taking the power back, turning the TV off because the revolution will not be televised. It's no commercialism. The revolution will happen without commercialism because the revolution is against capitalism and plays a huge part in the aspect of Kendrick's music. Like bringing art back, diminishing the capitalism, diminishing the evil, diminishing the corruption, as Kendrick has been asking for. He's been asking for change. And revolution, rebellion plays a huge part in his music. Also from a performance aspect, Kendrick brings a lot of personality here, a lot of charisma. Not only that, but I love the manic, quivering ad-lib he does. The like he got this uttering, shuddering chill or something. He's just going out of his mind. There's also the dreamy, large, luxurious, and sexy, and just lush Dodger Blue. That sounds like Zapp and Roger, Pewter Love, and really takes us to like a detour of LA and really shows love, really takes pride in where he comes from, definitely in his triumphs, and shuts down any moron who tries to downplay it, tries to downplay his come up. And I also love the heavenly harmonies on here. And Kendrick really sounds in lockstep with the choral vocals here. And also, speaking of come up, I think that also plays into the Heart Part 6, which we'll get into. There's also Peakaboo, which I feel contrasts this track great once again with how unhinged and bassy it is, with these very sinister, sharp keys, with probably the most off-the-wall one-liners here. They're so damn catchy. Hey, that's my bitch. Peekaboo. It's definitely a flex track, sure, but I do feel with the cheeky delivery, the cold beat, Kendrick definitely does do it justice. Also, the Heart Part 6, as I mentioned before, that's very heartfelt, has a lot of heart, no pun intended, that honestly feels so visual, so vivid, and detailed, to a point where I actually feel like I'm watching the biopic, where I'm actually watching what's going on, like I'm watching this movie. Like Kendrick is such a fucking writer, director, rapper, like all in one. As he starts off with dudes in the studio watching World Star, Absol mumbling and crumbling a pack as he cracks a smile. And that's only the beginning. It's just this type of lyricism where Kendrick knows how to paint a picture. It honestly reminds me of the creative level of a Biggie, a Nas, like that level of storytelling and sharing his mentality, sharing what's in his heart, the unity, and how Kendrick delineates the rise and fall of TDE, of Black Hippie. And I probably shouldn't give away the whole story, but you could tell he had nothing but determination to bring them together. He had nothing but motivation to make sure they ate, to make sure his friends got to where they wanted to be. And the chorus really does paint the direction of Kendrick's track here, of definitely the message Kendrick's trying to convey. And looking into the story, you would discover more about Black Hippie that you probably didn't know. Like Kendrick is very confessional here. He's always been a confessional artist. He's even more confessional on this track. So I wouldn't say this is just a background story. This is just a well-told background story, but there's also a moral to this. There's also a message to this, to those who are making music and who want to bring their friends and give them success as well. Like, don't lose sight of what really matters. use your heart. Don't take what you're seeing at face value. Like, really understand, really have love for your friends, love for the art, and don't let anything else come between that. And after that, we have a posse cut, the title track, which is one of my favorite tracks here. But I do feel it complements the narrative of unity of friends, with it being together a large effort. And finally, Gloria, which is one of the most confessional tracks here, as Kendrick is spilling his heart out to his pen, which he personifies as a woman, as a love interest. Like, again, like listening to this, I thought he was speaking on Whitney, but no, he's really talking about his pen. And honestly, I do think, similar to T-Pab, the lyrics from, I hope I'm saying her name right, Dira Barrera, I'm sorry, I truly hope I'm getting the name right. I'm sorry. I feel your presence here, the night of last night, and we start to cry. That reflects in your gaze, the night you and me, seated Anita and you. And Anita Baker was mentioned on the first track here. And the ending here is just absolutely gorgeous. Really showing Kendrick's origin with his pen, his love for the music, and it has so many great double meanings here. Like, there's various lines that are connected that if you really look at, you could see like how clever these are put. Like, just how intimate and connected Kendrick sounds here, and just brings so much tangibility to Kendrick's music. And I feel like with this album, if it's shown one thing, it's showing that Kendrick once again has proven himself to not be in your commercial big three. He's proven that he takes his art very seriously. He's proven he takes his people very seriously. He wants his people to prosper. And even showing so much self-awareness here that even he himself could slip up. And I feel he also shuts down the dumb conversation of Kendrick can't make bangers. Like, he doesn't have anything to play at a party. Doesn't have anything you could bump in the whip. Well, I guess after you listen to this, you could shut that down and also recognize he is saying something with these bangers as well. As he's brought to you themes that have shown facets of his life, that mirror facets of his life, and he's done it in a creative, catchy, compelling way, once again. And even more so, as he's done it with catchy hooks, great writing, various vocal performances, knows how to contrast each track from the next. Even though I don't think the theme connects, or with this not being a concept album, similar to Chromacopia, even though that was a concept album, I do wish there was more of a connection here, maybe more of a solid theme, but nevertheless, I think Kendrick has addressed certain issues, done it well, made a statement, and a great collection of tracks consistently, with production, lyrics, message, creativity, great performances, great sequencing. I'm feeling a 4.5 out of 5 on this record. If you've given this a listen, what did you think? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Why? And that's it. Caspa, I'm your plug. Hit me with a sub. Show me love. The lists are coming next. Be prepared for that. I know that didn't rhyme, but it's okay. Oh man, it's been a hell of a year. I'll see you there. Caspa, Kendrick Lamar. Till we meet again.